12. This proved to be the last of 20 entries or so. It will be seen from them that for all the devil's inventiveness, the scheme remained daily the same. First he would tempt me and then thwart me, leaving me with a dull pain in the very root of my being. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and how to do it, without impinging on a child's chastity. After all, I had had some experience in my life of pederosis, had visually possessed dappled nymphets in parks, had wedged my wary and bestial way into the hottest, most crowded corner of a city bus full of strap-hanging school children. But for almost 3 weeks I had been interrupted in all my pathetic machinations. The agent of these interruptions was usually the Haze woman, who, as the reader will mark, was more afraid of Lo's deriving some pleasure from me than of my enjoying Lo. The passion I had developed for that nymphette, for the first nymphette in my life that could be reached at last by my awkward, aching, timid claws, would have certainly landed me again in a sanatorium, had not the devil realized that I was to be granted some relief if he wanted to have me as a plaything for some time longer. The reader has also marked the curious mirage of the lake. It would have been logical on the part of Aubrey McFate, as I would like to dub that devil of mine, to arrange a small treat for me on the promised beach, in the presumed forest. Actually, the promise Mrs. Haze had made was a fraudulent one. She had not told me that Mary Rose Hamilton, a dark little beauty in her own right, was to come too, and that the two nymphets would be whispering apart, and playing apart, and having a good time all by themselves, while Mrs. Haze and her handsome lodger conversed sedately in the semi-nude, far from prying eyes. Incidentally, eyes did pry and tongues did wag. How queer life is! We hastened to alienate the very fates we intended to woo. Before my actual arrival, my landlady had planned to have an old spinster, a Miss Fallon, whose mother had been cook in Mrs. Haze's family, came to stay in the house with Lolita and me, while Mrs. Haze, a career girl at heart, sought some suitable job in the nearest city. Mrs. Haze had seen the whole situation very clearly, the bespectacled, round-backed Herr Humbert coming with his Central European trunks to gather dust in his corner behind a heap of old books, the unloved ugly little daughter firmly supervised by Miss Fallon, who had already once had Milo under her buzzard wing. Lo recalled that 1944 summer with an indignant shudder, and Mrs. Haze herself engaged as a receptionist in a great elegant city. But a not too complicated event interfered with that program. Miss Fallon broke her hip in Savannah, Georgia, on the very day I arrived in Ramsdale. 13. The Sunday after the Saturday already described proved to be as bright as the weatherman had predicted. When putting the breakfast things back on the chair outside my room for my good landlady to remove at her convenience, I gleaned the following situation by listening from the landing across which I had softly crept to the banisters in my old bedroom slippers, the only old things about me. There had been another row. Mrs. Hamilton had telephoned that her daughter was running a temperature. Mrs. Haze informed her daughter that the picnic would have to be postponed. Hot little Haze informed big cold Haze that, if so, she would not go with her to church. Mother said very well and left. I had come out on the landing straight after shaving, soapy bed, still in my white pajamas with the cornflower blue, not the lilac, design on the back. I now wiped off the soap, perfumed my hair and armpits, slipped on a purple silk dressing gown, and, humming nervously, went down the stairs in quest of Lo. I want my learned readers to participate in the scene I am about to replay. I want them to examine its every detail and see for themselves how careful, how chaste, the whole wine-sweet event is if viewed with what my lawyer has called, in a private talk we have had, impartial sympathy. So let us get started. I have a difficult job before me. Main character, Humbert the Hummer. Time, Sunday morning in June. Place, sunlit living room. Props, old, candy-striped Davenport, magazines, phonograph, Mexican knickknacks. The late Mr. Harold D. Haze, God bless the good man, had engendered my darling at the siesta hour in a blue-washed room, on a honeymoon trip to Veracruz, and mementos, among these Dolores, were all over the place. She wore that day a pretty print dress that I had seen on her once before, ample in the skirt, tight in the bodice, short-sleeved, pink, checkered with darker pink, and, to complete the color scheme, she had painted her lips and was holding in her hollowed hands a beautiful, banal, Eden red apple. She was not shod, however, for church. And her white Sunday purse lay discarded near the phonograph. My heart beat like a drum as she sat down, cool skirt ballooning, subsiding, on the sofa next to me, and played with her glossy fruit. She tossed it up into the sun-dusted air, and caught it made a cupped polished plot. Humbert intercepted the apple. "Give it back," she pleaded, showing the marbled flush of her palms. I produced delicious. She grasped it and bit into it, and my heart was like snow under thin crimson skin, and with the monkeyish nimbleness that was so typical of that American nymphette, she snatched out of my abstract grip the magazine I had opened. Pity no film had recorded the curious pattern, the monogrammic linkage of our simultaneous or overlapping moves. Rapidly, hardly hampered by the disfigured apple she held, Lo flipped violently through the pages in search of something she wished Humbert to see. Found it at last. I faked interest by bringing my head so close that her hair touched my temple and her arm brushed my cheek as she wiped her lips with her wrist. Because of the burnished mist through which I peered at the picture, I was slow in reacting to it, and her bare knees rubbed and knocked impatiently against each other. Dimly there came into view, a surrealist painter relaxing, supine, on a beach, and near him, likewise supine, a plaster replica of the Venus de Milo, half buried in sand. "Picture of the week," said the legend. I whisked the whole obscene thing away. Next moment, in a sham effort to retrieve it, she was all over me. Caught her by her thin knobby wrist. The magazine escaped to the floor like a flustered fowl. She twisted herself free, recoiled, and lay back in the right-hand corner of the davenport. Then, with perfect simplicity, the impudent child extended her legs across my lap. By this time I was in a state of excitement bordering on insanity, but I also had the cunning of the insane. Sitting there, on the sofa, I managed to attune, by a series of stealthy movements, my masked lust to her guileless limbs. It was no easy matter to divert the little maiden's attention while I performed the obscure adjustments necessary for the success of the trick. Talking fast, lagging behind my own breath, catching up with it, mimicking a sudden toothache to explain the breaks in my patter, and all the while keeping a maniac's inner eye on my distant golden goal, I cautiously increased the magic friction that was doing away, in an illusional, if not factual, sense, with the physically irremovable, but psychologically very friable texture of the material divide, pajamas and robe, between the weight of two sunburnt legs, resting athwart my lap, and the hidden tumor of an unspeakable passion. Having, in the course of my patter, hit upon something nicely mechanical, I recited, garbling them slightly, the words of a foolish song that was then popular. "Oh my Carmen, my little Carmen, something, something, those something nights, and the stars, and the cars, and the bars, and the barman." I kept repeating this automatic stuff and holding her under its special spell because of the garbling, and all the while I was mortally afraid that some act of God might interrupt me, might remove the golden load in the sensation of which all my being seemed concentrated, and this anxiety forced me to work, for the first minute or so, more hastily than was consensual with deliberately modulated enjoyment. The stars that sparkled, and the cars that parkled, and the bars, and the barman, were presently taken over by her. Her voice stole and corrected the tune I had been mutilating. She was musical and apple-sweet. Her legs twitched a little as they lay across my live lap. I stroked them. There she lolled in the right-hand corner, almost asprawl, Lola the bobby soxer, devouring her immemorial fruit, singing through its juice, losing her slipper, rubbing the heel of her slipperless foot in its sloppy anklet, against the pile of old magazines heaped on my left on the sofa, and every movement she made, every shuffle and ripple, helped me to conceal and to improve the secret system of tactile correspondence between beast and beauty, between my gagged, bursting beast and the beauty of her dimpled body in its innocent cotton frock. Under my glancing fingertips I felt the minute hairs bristle ever so slightly along her shins. I lost myself in the pungent but healthy heat which like summer haze hung about little Haze. Let her stay, let her stay. As she strained to chuck the core of her abolished apple into the fender, her young weight, her shameless innocent shanks and round bottom, shifted in my tense, tortured, surreptitiously laboring lap, and all of a sudden a mysterious change came over my senses. I entered a plane of being where nothing mattered, save the infusion of joy brewed within my body. What had begun as a delicious distension of my innermost roots became a glowing tingle which now had reached that state of absolute security, confidence and reliance not found elsewhere in conscious life. With a deep hot sweetness thus established and well on its way to the ultimate convulsion, I felt I could slow down in order to prolong the glow. Lolita had been safely solipsized. The implied song pulsated in the supplied poplars. We were fantastically and divinely alone. I watched her, rosy, gold-dusted, beyond the veil of my controlled delight, unaware of it, alien to it, and the sun was on her lips, and her lips were apparently still forming the words of the Carmen Barman ditty that no longer reached my consciousness. Everything was now ready. The nerves of pleasure had been laid bare. The corpuscles of cross were entering the phase of frenzy. The least pressure would suffice to set all paradise loose. I had ceased to be Humbert the Hound, the sad-eyed degenerate cur clasping the boot that would presently kick him away. I was above the tribulations of ridicule, beyond the possibilities of retribution. In my self-made seraglio, I was a radiant and robust Turk, deliberately, in the full consciousness of his freedom, postponing the moment of actually enjoying the youngest and frailest of his slaves. Suspended on the brink of that voluptuous abyss, a nicety of physiological equipoise comparable to certain techniques in the arts, I kept repeating the chance words after her barman, alarman, my charman, my Carmen, amen, ahiman as one talking and laughing in his sleep while my happy hand crept up her sunny leg as far as the shadow of decency allowed. The day before she had collided with the heavy chest in the hall and look. I gasped, look what you've done to yourself, look, for there was, I swear, a yellowish violet bruise on her lovely nymphette thigh which my huge hairy hand massaged and slowly enveloped, and because of her very perfunctory underthings, there seemed to be nothing to prevent my muscular thumb from reaching the hot hollow of her groin just as you might tickle and caress a giggling child just that and, oh, it's nothing at all, she cried with a sudden shrill note in her voice, and she wiggled, and squirmed, and threw her head back, and her teeth rested on her glistening underlip as she half turned away, and my moaning mouth, gentlemen of the jury, almost reached her bare neck, while I crushed out against her left buttock the last throb of the longest ecstasy man or monster had ever known. Immediately afterward, as if we had been struggling and now my grip had eased, she rolled off the sofa and jumped to her feet, to her foot, rather in order to attend to the formidably loud telephone that may have been ringing for ages as far as I was concerned. There she stood and blinked, cheeks aflame, hair awry, her eyes passing over me as lightly as they did over the furniture, and as she listened or spoke, to her mother who was telling her to come to lunch with her at the Chatfields. Neither Lo nor Hum knew yet what busybody Haze was plotting. She kept tapping the edge of the table with the slipper she held in her hand. Blessed be the Lord, she had noticed nothing. With a handkerchief of multicolored silk, on which her listening eyes rested in passing, I wiped the sweat off my forehead, and, immersed in a euphoria of release, rearranged my royal robes. She was still at the telephone, haggling with her mother, wanted to be fetched by car, my little Carmen, when, singing louder and louder, I swept up the stairs and set a deluge of steaming water roaring into the tub. At this point I may as well give the words of that song hit in full to the best of my recollection, at least I don't think I ever had it right. Here goes, oh my Carmen, my little Carmen. Something those something nights, and the stars, and the cars, and the bars and the barman and, oh my Charmin, our dreadful fights. And the something town where so gaily, arm in arm, we went, and our final row, and the gun I killed you with, oh my Carmen, the gun I am holding now. Drew his .32 automatic, I guess, and put a bullet through his mole's eye. 14. I had lunch in town, had not been so hungry for years. The house was still lowless when I strolled back. I spent the afternoon musing, scheming, blissfully digesting my experience of the morning. I felt proud of myself. I had stolen the honey of a spasm without impairing the morals of a minor. Absolutely no harm done. The conjurer had poured milk, molasses, foaming champagne into a young lady's new white purse, and lo, the purse was intact. Thus had I delicately constructed my ignoble, ardent, sinful dream, and still Lolita was safe and I was safe. What I had madly possessed was not she, but my own creation, another, fanciful Lolita perhaps, more real than Lolita, overlapping, encasing her, floating between me and her, and having no will, no consciousness, indeed, no life of her own. The child knew nothing. I had done nothing to her. And nothing prevented me from repeating a performance that affected her as little as if she were a photographic image rippling upon a screen and I a humble hunchback abusing myself in the dark. The afternoon drifted on, in ripe silence, and the sappy tall trees seemed to be in the know, and desire, even stronger than before, began to afflict me again. Let her come soon, I prayed, addressing a lone God, and while Mama is in the kitchen, let a repetition of the Davenport scene be staged, please. I adore her so horribly. Horribly is the wrong word. The elation with which the vision of new delights filled me was not horrible but pathetic. I qualify it as pathetic. Pathetic because despite the insatiable fire of my venereal appetite, I intended, with the most fervent force and foresight, to protect the purity of that 12-year-old child. And now see how I was repaid for my pains. No Lolita came home, she had gone with the Chatfields to a movie. The table was laid with more elegance than usual, candlelight, if you please. In this mockashora, Mrs. Haze gently touched the silver on both sides of her plate as if touching piano keys, and smiled down on her empty plate, was on a diet, and said she hoped I liked the salad, recipe lifted from a woman's magazine. She hoped I liked the cold cuts, too. It had been a perfect day. Mrs. Chatfield was a lovely person. Phyllis, her daughter, was going to a summer camp tomorrow. For 3 weeks. Lolita, it was decided, would go Thursday. Instead of waiting till July, as had been initially planned. And stay there after Phyllis had left. Till school began. A pretty prospect, my heart. Oh, how I was taken aback, for did it not mean I was losing my darling, just when I had secretly made her mine? To explain my grim mood, I had to use the same toothache I had already simulated in the morning. Must have been an enormous molar, with an abscess as big as a maraschino cherry. We have, said Haze, an excellent dentist. Our neighbor, in fact. Dr. Quilty. Uncle or cousin, I think, of the playwright. Think it will pass? Well, just as you wish. In the fall I shall have him brace her, as my mother used to say. It make her blow a little. I am afraid she has been bothering you frightfully all these days. And we are in for a couple of stormy ones before she goes. She has flatly refused to go, and I confess I left her with the Chatfields because I dreaded to face her alone just yet. The movie may mollify her. Phyllis is a very sweet girl, and there is no earthly reason for Lo to dislike her. Really, monsieur, I am very sorry about that tooth of yours. It would be so much more reasonable to let me contact Ivor Quilty first thing tomorrow morning if it still hurts. And, you know, I think a summer camp is so much healthier, and well, it is also much more reasonable, as I say, than to mope on a suburban lawn and use Mama's lipstick, and pursue shy studious gentlemen, and go into tantrums at the least provocation. Are you sure, I said at last, that she will be happy there? Lame, lamentably lame, she'd better, said Haze. And it won't be all play either. The camp is run by Shirley Holmes, you know, the woman who wrote Campfire Girl. Camp will teach Dolores Haze to grow in many things: health, knowledge, temper. And particularly in a sense of responsibility towards other people. Shall we take these candles with us and sit for a while on the piazza, or do you want to go to bed and nurse that tooth? Nurse that tooth. 15. Next day they drove downtown to buy things needed for the camp. Any wearable purchase worked wonders with Lo. She seemed her usual sarcastic self at dinner. Immediately afterwards, she went up to her room to plunge into the comic books acquired for rainy days at Camp Q. They were so thoroughly sampled by Thursday that she left them behind. I too retired to my lair, and wrote letters. My plan now was to leave for the seaside and then, when school began, resume my existence in the Haze household, for I knew already that I could not live without the child. On Tuesday they went shopping again, and I was asked to answer the phone if the camp mistress rang up during their absence. She did, and a month or so later we had occasion to recall our pleasant chat. That Tuesday, Lo had her dinner in her room. She had been crying after a routine row with her mother and, as had happened on former occasions, had not wished me to see her swollen eyes. She had one of those tender complexions that after a good cry get all blurred and inflamed, and morbidly alluring. I regretted keenly her mistake about my private aesthetics, for I simply love that tinge of Botticellian pink, that rose about the lips, those wet, matted eyelashes, and, naturally, her bashful whim deprived me of many opportunities of specious consolation. There was, however, more to it than I thought. As we sat in the darkness of the veranda, a rude wind had put out her red candles. Haze, with a dreary laugh, said she had told Lo that her beloved Humbert thoroughly approved of the whole camp idea, and now, added Haze, the child throws a fit. Pretext, you and I want to get rid of her. Actual reason, I told her we would exchange tomorrow for plainer stuff, some much too cute night things that she bullied me into buying for her. You see, she sees herself as a starlet, I see her as a sturdy, healthy, but decidedly homely kid. This, I guess, is at the root of our troubles. On Wednesday I managed to waylay Lo for a few seconds. She was on the landing, in sweatshirt and green-stained white shorts, rummaging in a trunk. I said something meant to be friendly and funny, but she only emitted a snort without looking at me. Desperate, dying Humbert patted her clumsily on her coccyx, and she struck him, quite painfully, with one of the late Mr. Haze's shoe trees. Double-crosser, she said as I crawled downstairs, rubbing my arm with a great show of rue. She did not condescend to have dinner with Hum and Mum, washed her hair and went to bed with her ridiculous books. And on Thursday quiet Mrs. Haze drove her to Camp Q. As greater authors than I have put it, let readers imagine etc. On second thought, I may as well give those imaginations a kick in the pants. I knew I had fallen in love with Lolita forever, but I also knew she would not be forever Lolita. She would be 13 on January 1st. In 2 years or so she would cease being an infant and would turn into a young girl, and then, into a college girl, that horror of horrors. The word forever referred only to my own passion, to the eternal Lolita as reflected in my blood. The Lolita whose iliac crests had not yet flared, the Lolita that today I could touch and smell and hear and see, the Lolita of the strident voice and rich brown hair, of the bangs and the swirls and the sides and the curls at the back, and the sticky hot neck, and the vulgar vocabulary, revolting, super, luscious, goon, drip, that Lolita, my Lolita, poor Catullus would lose forever. So how could I afford not to see her for 2 months of summer insomnias? 2 whole months out of the 2 years of her remaining nymphage. Should I disguise myself as a somber old-fashioned girl, gawky Humbert, and put up my tent on the outskirts of Camp Q, in the hope that its russet nymphets would clamor, "Let us adopt that deep-voiced DP," and drag the said, shyly smiling Bertha O'Grandpied to their rustic hearth? Bertha will sleep with Dolores Haze. Idle dry dreams. 2 months of beauty, 2 months of tenderness, would be squandered forever, and I could do nothing about it, but nothing, Macerine. 1 drop of rare honey, however, that Thursday did hold in its acorn cup. Haze was to drive her to the camp in the early morning. Upon sundry sounds of departure reaching me, I rolled out of bed and leaned out of the window. Under the poplars, the car was already athrob. On the sidewalk, Louise stood shading her eyes with her hand, as if the little traveler were already riding into the low morning sun. The gesture proved to be premature. "Hurry up!" shouted Haze. My Lolita, who was half in and about to slam the car door, wind down the glass, waved to Louise and the Poplars, whom and which she was never to see again, interrupted the motion of fate. She looked up and dashed back into the house, Haze furiously calling after her. A moment later I heard my sweetheart running up the stairs. My heart expanded with such force that it almost blotted me out. I hitched up the pants of my pajamas, flung the door open, and simultaneously Lolita arrived, in her Sunday frock, stamping, panting, and then she was in my arms, her innocent mouth melting under the ferocious pressure of dark male jaws, my palpitating darling. The next instant I heard her alive, unraped clatter downstairs. The motion of fate was resumed. The blonde leg was pulled in, the car door was re-slammed and driver Haze at the violent wheel, rubber red lips writhing in angry, inaudible speech, swung my darling away, while unnoticed by them or Louise, old Miss Opposite, an invalid, feebly but rhythmically waved from her vine veranda. 16. The hollow of my hand was still ivory, full of Lolita, full of the feel of her pre-adolescently incurved back, that ivory smooth, sliding sensation of her skin through the thin frock that I had worked up and down while I held her. I marched into her tumbled room, threw open the door of the closet, and plunged into a heap of crumpled things that had touched her. There was particularly one pink texture, sleazy, torn, with a faintly acrid odor in the seam. I wrapped in it Humbert's huge engorged heart. A poignant chaos was welling within me, but I had to drop those things and hurriedly regain my composure, as I became aware of the maid's velvety voice calling me softly from the stairs. She had a message for me, she said, and, topping my automatic thanks with a kindly "You're welcome," good Louise left an unstamped, curiously clean-looking letter in my shaking hand. "This is a confession. I love you," so the letter began, and for a distorted moment I mistook its hysterical scrawl for a schoolgirl's scribble. "Last Sunday in church bade you, who refused to come to see our beautiful new windows!" Only last Sunday, my dear one, when I asked the Lord what to do about it, I was told to act as I am acting now. You see, there is no alternative. I have loved you from the minute I saw you. I am a passionate and lonely woman, and you are the love of my life. Now, my dearest, mon cher, monsieur, you have read this, now you know. So, will you please, at once, pack and leave? This is a landlady's order. I am dismissing a lodger. I am kicking you out. Go. Scram. Departs. I shall be back by dinner time, if I do 80 both ways and don't have an accident. But what would it matter? And I do not wish to find you in the house. Please, leave at once, now, do not even read this absurd note to the end. Go. Adieu. The situation, Sherry, is quite simple. Of course, I know with absolute certainty that I am nothing to you, nothing at all to you, nothing at all. Oh yes, you enjoy talking to me, and kidding poor me. You have grown fond of our friendly house, of the books I like, of my lovely garden, even of Lo's noisy ways, but I am nothing to you. Right? Right. Nothing to you whatever. But if, after reading my confession, you decided, in your dark romantic European way, that I am attractive enough for you to take advantage of my letter and make a pass at me, then you would be a criminal worse than a kidnapper who rapes a child. You see, Sherry. If you decided to stay, if I found you at home, which I know I won't, and that's why I am able to go on like this, the fact of your remaining would only mean one thing, that you want me as much as I do you, as a lifelong mate, and that you are ready to link up your life with mine forever and ever and be a father to my little girl. Let me rave and ramble on for a teeny while more, my dearest, since I know this letter has been by now torn by you, and its pieces, illegible, in the vortex of the toilet. My dearest, mon trop cher, what a world of love I have built up for you during this miraculous June. I know how reserved you are, how British. Your old-world reticence, your sense of decorum may be shocked by the boldness of an American girl. You who conceal your strongest feelings must think me a shameless little idiot for throwing open my poor bruised heart like this. In years gone by, many disappointments came my way. Mr. Haze was a splendid person, a sterling soul, but he happened to be 20 years my senior, and well, let us not gossip about the past. My dearest, your curiosity must be well satisfied if you have ignored my request and read this letter to the bitter end. Never mind. Destroy it and go. Do not forget to leave the key on the desk in your room. And some scrap of address so that I could refund the $12 I owe you till the end of the month. Goodbye, dear one. Pray for me if you ever pray. What I present here is what I remember of the letter, and what I remember of the letter I remember verbatim, including that awful French. It was at least twice longer. I have left out a lyrical passage which I more or less skipped at the time, concerning Lolita's brother who died at 2 when she was 4, and how much I would have liked him. Let me see, what else can I say? Yes. There is just a chance that the vortex of the toilet, where the letter did go, is my own matter-of-fact contribution. She probably begged me to make a special fire to consume it. My first movement was one of repulsion and retreat. My second was like a friend's calm hand falling upon my shoulder and bidding me take my time. I did. I came out of my daze and found myself still in Lo's room. A full-page ad ripped out of a slick magazine was affixed to the wall above the bed, between a crooner's mug and the lashes of a movie actress. It represented a dark-haired young husband with a kind of drained look in his Irish eyes. He was modeling a robe by so-and-so and holding a brig-like tray by so-and-so, with breakfast for 2. The legend, by the Reverend Thomas Morrill, called him a conquering hero. The thoroughly conquered lady, not shown, was presumably propping herself up to receive her half of the tray. How her bedfellow was to get under the bridge without some messy mishap was not clear. Lo had drawn a jocose arrow to the haggard lover's face and had put, in block letters, HH, and indeed, despite a difference of a few years, the resemblance was striking. Under this was another picture, also a colored ad. A distinguished playwright was solemnly smoking a drome. He always smoked dromes. The resemblance was slight. Under this was Lo's chase bed, littered with comics. The enamel had come off the bedstead, leaving black, more or less rounded, marks on the white. Having convinced myself that Louise had left, I got into Lo's bed and reread the letter. 17. Gentlemen of the jury. I cannot swear that certain motions pertaining to the business in hand, if I may coin an expression, had not drifted across my mind before. My mind had not retained him in any logical form or in any relation to definitely recollected occasions, but I cannot swear, let me repeat, that I had not toyed with them, to rig up yet another expression, in my dimness of thought, in my darkness of passion. There may have been times, there must have been times, if I know my Humbert, when I had brought up for detached inspection the idea of marrying a mature widow, say, Charlotte Haze, with not one relative left in the wide grey world, merely in order to have my way with her child, Lola, Lolita. I am even prepared to tell my tormentors that perhaps once or twice I had cast an appraiser's cold eye at Charlotte's coral lips and bronze hair and dangerously low neckline, and had vaguely tried to fit her into a plausible daydream. This I confess under torture. Imaginary torture, perhaps, but all the more horrible. I wish I might digress and tell you more of the pavor nocturnus that would rack me at night hideously after a chance term had struck me in the random readings of my boyhood, such as Pine Forte et Dr. What a genius of pain must have invented that, or the dreadful, mysterious, insidious words trauma, traumatic event, and transom. But my tale is sufficiently incondite already. After a while I destroyed the letter and went to my room, and ruminated, and rumpled my hair, and modeled my purple robe, and moaned through clenched teeth, and suddenly, gentlemen of the jury, I felt a Dostoevskian grin dawning, through the very grimace that twisted my lips, like a distant and terrible sun. I imagined, under conditions of new and perfect visibility, all the casual caresses her mother's husband would be able to lavish on his Lolita. I would hold her against me 3 times a day, every day. All my troubles would be expelled, I would be a healthy man. To hold thee lightly on a gentle knee and print on thy soft cheek a parent's kiss. Well read, Humbert. Then, with all possible caution, on mental tiptoe so to speak, I conjured up Charlotte as a possible mate. By God, I could make myself bring her that economically halved grapefruit, that sugarless breakfast. Humbert sweating in the fierce white light, and howled at, and trodden upon by sweating policemen, is now ready to make a further statement, Quelmo, as he turns his conscience inside out and rips off its innermost lining. I did not plan to marry poor Charlotte in order to eliminate her in some vulgar, gruesome and dangerous manner, such as killing her by placing 5-bichloride of mercury tablets in her preprandial sherry or anything like that, but a delicately allied, pharmacopoeial thought did tinkle in my sonorous and clouded brain. Why limit myself to the modest masked caress I had tried already? Other visions of Venerie presented themselves to me, swaying and smiling. I saw myself administering a powerful sleeping potion to both mother and daughter so as to fondle the latter through the night with perfect impunity. The house was full of Charlotte's snore, while Lolita hardly breathed in her sleep, as still as a painted girl child. Mother, I swear Kinney never even touched me. You either lie, Dolores Haze, or it was an incubus. No, I would not go that far. So Humbert the Kubus schemed and dreamed, and the red sun of desire and decision, the 2 things that create a live world, rose higher and higher, while upon a succession of balconies a succession of libertines, sparkling glass in hand, toasted the bliss of past and future nights. Then, figuratively speaking, I shattered the glass, and boldly imagined, for I was drunk on those visions by then and underrated the gentleness of my nature, how eventually I might blackmail that it too strong a word mauve-mail Big Haze into letting me consort with the little Haze by gently threatening the poor doting Big Dove with desertion if she tried to bar me from playing with my legal stepdaughter. In a word, before such an amazing offer, before such a vastness and variety of vistas, I was as helpless as Adam at the preview of early Oriental history, merged in his apple orchard. And now take down the following important remark: the artist in me has been given the upper hand over the gentleman. It is with a great effort of will that in this memoir I have managed to tune my style to the tone of the journal that I kept when Mrs. Haze was to me but an obstacle. That journal of mine is no more, but I have considered it my artistic duty to preserve its intonations no matter how false and brutal they may seem to me now. Fortunately, my story has reached a point where I can cease insulting poor Charlotte for the sake of retrospective verisimilitude. Wishing to spare poor Charlotte 2 or 3 hours of suspense on a winding road, and avoid, perhaps, a head-on collision that would shatter our different dreams, I made a thoughtful but abortive attempt to reach her at the camp by telephone. She had left half an hour before, and getting low instead, I told her, trembling and brimming with my mastery over fate, that I was going to marry her mother. I had to repeat it twice because something was preventing her from giving me her attention. "Gee, that's swell," she said, laughing. "When is the wedding?" "Hold on a second, the pup that put here has got hold of my sock. Listen," and she added she guessed she was going to have loads of fun. And I realized as I hung up that a couple of hours at that camp had been sufficient to blot out with new impressions the image of handsome Humbert from little Lolita's mind. But what did it matter now? I would get her back as soon as a decent amount of time after the wedding had elapsed. The orange blossom would have scarcely withered on the grave, as a poet might have said. But I am no poet. I am only a very conscientious recorder. After Louise had gone, I inspected the icebox, and finding it much too puritanic, walked to town and bought the richest foods available. I also bought some good liquor and 2 or 3 kinds of vitamins. I was pretty sure that with the aid of these stimulants and my natural resources, I would divert any embarrassment that my indifference might incur when called upon to display a strong and impatient flame. Again and again resourceful Humbert evoked Charlotte as seen in the ratio of a manly imagination. She was well-groomed and shapely, this I could say for her, and she was my Lolita's big sister. This notion, perhaps, I could keep up if only I did not visualize too realistically her heavy hips, round knees, ripe bust, the coarse pink skin of her neck, coarse by comparison with silk and honey, and all the rest of that sorry and dull thing, a handsome woman. The sun made its usual round of the house as the afternoon ripened into evening. I had a drink. And another. And yet another. Gin and pineapple juice, my favorite mixture, always double my energy. I decided to busy myself with our unkempt lawn. Unpartied attention. It was crowded with dandelions, and a cursed dog I loathed. Dogs had defiled the flat stones where a sundial had once stood. Most of the dandelions had changed from suns to moons. The gin and Lolita were dancing in me, and I almost fell over the folding chairs that I attempted to dislodge. Incarnadine zebras. There are some eructations that sound like cheers, at least, mine did. An old fence at the back of the garden separated us from the neighbors' garbage receptacles and lilacs, but there was nothing between the front end of our lawn, where it sloped along one side of the house, and the street. Therefore I was able to watch, with the smirk of one about to perform a good action, for the return of Charlotte. That tooth should be extracted at once. As I lurched and lunged with the hand mower, bits of grass optically twittering in the low sun, I kept an eye on that section of suburban street. It curved in from under an archway of huge shade trees, then sped towards us down, quite sharply, past old Miss Opposite's ivied brick house and high sloping lawn, much trimmer than ours, and disappeared behind our own front porch, which I could not see from where I happily belched and labored. The dandelions perished. A reek of sap mingled with the pineapple. Two little girls, Marian and Mabel, whose comings and goings I had mechanically followed of late, but who could replace my Lolita, went toward the avenue, from which our lawn street cascaded, one pushing a bicycle, the other feeding from a paper bag, both talking at the top of their sunny voices. Leslie, old Miss Opposite's gardener and chauffeur, a very amiable and athletic Negro, grinned at me from afar and shouted, re-shouted, commented by gesture, that I was mighty energetic today. The fool dog of the prosperous junk dealer next door ran after a blue car. No Charlotte's. The prettier of the two little girls, Mabel, I think, shorts, halter with little to halt, bright-hairy nymphette, by pan ! Ran back down the street crumpling her paper bag and was hidden from this green goat by the frontage of Mr. and Mrs. Humbert's residence. A station wagon popped out of the leafy shade of the avenue, dragging some of it on its roof before the shadows snapped, and swung by at an idiotic pace, the sweatshirted driver roof holding with his left hand and the junkman's dog tearing alongside. There was a smiling pause, and then, with a flutter in my breast, I witnessed the return of the blue sedan. I saw it glide downhill and disappear behind the corner of the house. I had a glimpse of her calm pale profile. It occurred to me that until she went upstairs she would not know whether I had gone or not. A minute later, with an expression of great anguish on her face, she looked down at me from the window of Lo's room. By sprinting upstairs, I managed to reach that room before she left it. 18. When the bride is a widow and the groom is a widower, when the former has lived in our great little town for hardly 2 years, and the latter for hardly a month, when monsieur wants to get the whole damned thing over with as quickly as possible, and madame gives in with a tolerant smile, then, my reader, the wedding is generally a quiet affair. The bride may dispense with a tiara of orange blossoms securing her fingertip veil, nor does she carry a white orchid in a prayer book. The bride's little daughter might have added to the ceremonies uniting H and H. A touch of vivid vermeil, but I knew I would not dare be too tender with cornered Lolita yet, and therefore agreed it was not worthwhile daring the child away from her beloved Camp Q. My soi-disant passionate and lonely Charlotte was in everyday life matter-of-fact and gregarious. Moreover, I discovered that although she could not control her heart or her cries, she was a woman of principle. Immediately after she had become more or less my mistress, despite the stimulants, her nervous, eager heroic exclamation mark had some initial trouble, for which, however, he amply compensated her by a fantastic display of old-world endearments. Good Charlotte interviewed me about my relations with God. I could have answered that on that score my mind was open, I said, instead paying my tribute to a pious platitude that I believed in a cosmic spirit. Looking down at her fingernails, she also asked me had I not in my family a certain strange strain. I countered by inquiring whether she would still want to marry me if my father's maternal grandfather had been, say, a Turk. She said it did not matter a bit, but that, if she ever found out I did not believe in our Christian God, she would commit suicide. She said it so solemnly that it gave me the creeps. It was then I knew she was a woman of principle. Oh, she was very genteel, she said excuse me whenever a slight burp interrupted her flowing speech, called an envelope, and when talking to her lady friends referred to me as Mr. Humbert. I thought it would please her if I entered the community trailing some glamour after me. On the day of our wedding a little interview with me appeared in the society column of the Ramsdale Journal, with a photograph of Charlotte, one eyebrow up and a misprint in her name, Hazer. Despite this contretemps, the publicity warmed the porcelain cockles of her heart and made my rattles shake with awful glee. By engaging in church work as well as by getting to know the better mothers of Lowe's schoolmates, Charlotte in the course of 20 months or so had managed to become if not a prominent, at least an acceptable citizen, but never before had she come under that thrilling rubric, and it was I who put her there. Mr. Edgar H. Humbert, I threw in the Edgar just for the heck of it, writer and explorer. Mku's brother, when taking it down, asked me what I had written. Whatever I told him came out as several books on Peacock, Rainbow and other poets. It was also noted that Charlotte and I had known each other for several years and that I was a distant relation of her first husband. I hinted I had had an affair with her 13 years ago, but this was not mentioned in print. To Charlotte I said that society columns should contain a shimmer of errors. Let us go on with this curious tale. When called upon to enjoy my promotion from lodger to lover, did I experience only bitterness and distaste? No. Mr. Humbert confesses to a certain titillation of his vanity, to some faint tenderness, even to a pattern of remorse daintily running along the steel of his conspiratorial dagger. Never had I thought that the rather ridiculous, though rather handsome Mrs. Haze, with her blind faith in the wisdom of her church and book club, her mannerisms of elocution, her harsh, cold, contemptuous attitude toward an adorable, downy-armed child of 12, could turn into such a touching, helpless creature as soon as I laid my hands upon her, which happened on the threshold of Lolita's room, whither she tremulously backed, repeating no, no, please no. The transformation improved her looks. Her smile that had been such a contrived thing, thenceforth became the radiance of utter adoration, a radiance having something soft and moist about it, in which, with wonder, I recognized a resemblance to the lovely, inane, lost look that Lo had when gloating over a new kind of concoction at the soda fountain or mutely admiring my expensive, always tailor-fresh clothes. Deeply fascinated, I would watch Charlotte while she swapped parental woes with some other lady and made that national grimace of feminine resignation, eyes rolling up, mouth drooping sideways, which, in an infantile form, I had seen Lo making herself. We had highballs before turning in, and with their help, I would manage to evoke the child while caressing the mother. This was the white stomach within which my nymphette had been a little curved fish in 1934. This carefully dyed hair, so sterile to my sense of smell and touch, acquired at certain lamplit moments in the poster bed the tinge, if not the texture, of Lolita's curls. I kept telling myself, as I wielded my brand new large-as-life wife, that biologically this was the nearest I could get to Lolita, that at Lolita's age, Lot had been as desirable a schoolgirl as her daughter was, and as Lolita's daughter would be someday. I had my wife unearthed from under a collection of shoes, Mr. Haze had a passion for them, it appears, a 30-year-old album, so that I might see how Lot had looked as a child, and even though the light was wrong and the dresses graceless, I was able to make out a dim first version of Lolita's outline, legs, cheekbones, bobbed nose. Lolita, Lolitan. So I peeped across the hedges of years, into wan little windows. And when, by means of pitifully ardent, naively lascivious caresses, she of the noble nipple and massive thigh prepared me for the performance of my nightly duty, it was still an infet's scent that in despair I tried to pick up, as I bayed through the undergrowth of dark decaying forests. I simply can't tell you how gentle, how touching my poor wife was. At breakfast, in the depressingly bright kitchen, with its chrome glitter and hardware and company calendar and cute breakfast nook, simulating that coffee shop where in their college days Charlotte and Humbert used to coo together, she would sit, robed in red, her elbow on the plastic top table, her cheek propped on her fist, and stare at me with intolerable tenderness as I consumed my ham and eggs. Humbert's face might twitch with neuralgia, but in her eyes it vied in beauty and animation with the sun and shadows of leaves rippling on the white refrigerator. My solemn exasperation was to her the silence of love. My small income added to her even smaller one impressed her as a brilliant fortune, not because the resulting sum now sufficed for most middle-class needs, but because even my money shone in her eyes with the magic of my manliness, and she saw our joint account as one of those southern boulevards at midday that have solid shade on one side and smooth sunshine on the other, all the way to the end of a prospect, where pink mountains loom. Into the 50 days of our cohabitation Charlotte crammed the activities of as many years. The poor woman busied herself with a number of things she had foregone long before or had never been much interested in, as if, to prolong these Proustian intonations, by my marrying the mother of the child I loved I had enabled my wife to regain an abundance of youth by proxy. With the zest of a banal young bride, she started to glorify the home. Knowing as I did its every cranny by heart since those days when from my chair I mentally mapped out Lolita's course through the house I had long entered into a sort of emotional relationship with it, with its very ugliness and dirt, and now I could almost feel the wretched thing cower in its reluctance to endure the bath of ecru and ochre and putbuff and snuff that Charlotte planned to give it. She never got as far as that, thank God. But she did use up a tremendous amount of energy in washing window shades, waxing the slats of Venetian blinds, purchasing new shades and new blinds, returning them to the store, replacing them by others, and so on, in a constant chiaroscuro of smiles and frowns, doubts and pouts. She dabbled in cretonne and chintzes, she changed the colors of the sofa, the sacred sofa where a bubble of paradise had once burst in slow motion within me. She rearranged the furniture and was pleased when she found, in a household treatise, that it is permissible to separate a pair of sofa commodes and their companion lamps. With the authoress of Your Home Is You, she developed a hatred for little lean chairs and spindle tables. She believed that a room having a generous expanse of glass, and lots of richwood paneling was an example of the masculine type of room, whereas the feminine type was characterized by lighter-looking windows and frailer woodwork. The novels I had found her reading when I moved in were now replaced by illustrated catalogs and homemaking guides. From a firm located at 4640 Roosevelt Boulevard, Philadelphia, she ordered for our double bed a damask-covered 312-coil mattress, although the old one seemed to me resilient and durable enough for whatever it had to support. A Midwesterner, as her late husband had also been, she had lived in Coy-Ramsdale, the gem of an eastern state, not long enough to know all the nice people. She knew slightly the jovial dentist who lived in a kind of ramshackle wooden chateau behind our lawn. She had met at a church tea the snooty wife of the local junk dealer who owned the colonial white horror at the corner of the avenue. Now and then she visited with old Miss Opposite, but the more patrician matrons among those she called upon, or met at lawn functions, or had telephone chats with such dainty ladies as Mrs. Glave, Mrs. Sheridan, Mrs. McChrystal, Mrs. Knight and others, seldom seemed to call on my neglected Charlotte. Indeed, the only couple with whom she had relations of real cordiality, Devoid of any array or pensée or practical foresight, were the Farlows who had just come back from a business trip to Chile in time to attend our wedding, with the Chatfields, McCoos, and a few others, but not Mrs. Junk or the even prouder Mrs. Talbot. John Farlow was a middle-aged, quietly athletic, quietly successful dealer in sporting goods, who had an office at Parkington, 40 miles away. It was he who got me the cartridges for that Colt and showed me how to use it, during a walk in the woods one Sunday. He was also what he called with a smile a part-time lawyer and had handled some of Charlotte's affairs. Jean, his youngish wife, and first cousin, was a long-limbed girl in harlequin glasses with 2 boxer dogs, 2 pointed breasts and a big red mouth. She painted landscapes and portraits, and vividly do I remember praising, over cocktails, the picture she had made of a niece of hers, little Rosalind Honeck, a rosy honey in a Girl Scout uniform, beret of green worsted, belt of green webbing, charming shoulder-long curls. And John removed his pipe and said it was a pity Dolly, my Lolita, and Rosaline were so critical of each other at school, but he hoped, and we all hoped, they would get on better when they returned from their respective camps. We talked of the school. It had its drawbacks, and it had its virtues. Of course, too many of the tradespeople here are Italians, said John, but on the other hand we are still spared. I wish, interrupted Jean with a laugh, Dolly and Rosaline were spending the summer together. Suddenly I imagined Lo returning from Camp Brown, warm, drowsy, drugged, and was ready to weep with passion and impatience.